The alley was cold, narrow, and full of garbage.
Ow.
Rainwater dripped from broken pipes. Rotten food and rusted metal covered the floor. Most people avoided this place, but not her. She had nowhere else to go. The alien widow sat in the corner, wrapped in a torn cloth, holding her child close. Her skin was pale gray, her eyes hollow, and her body thin like a stick. Her child, barely 4, coughed weakly, too tired to cry. They hadn't eaten in 2 days. They had slept on stone under the open sky and begged in silence. Zelani had once lived in a warm home on her own planet. She had a husband, a garden, and soft beds. But when the war came, everything was taken. Her planet was burned. Died in battle. She was thrown into a world where no one cared. Now, she was nothing but a burden in the eyes of the galaxy. She hid behind tall crates near the human market, hoping no one would see her. Not because she feared them, but because she knew what they'd say. Filthy alien, beggar, unwanted. Suddenly her child stirred and whimpered. The sound was soft, but in the quiet alley, it echoed like thunder. Zelani gently pressed a hand over the child's mouth and looked around, afraid someone might come. They were not allowed to be here. She had already been kicked out of 2 shelters and chased away from the food lines. Her stomach ached. Her child's body felt cold. She didn't care about herself anymore, but she couldn't let her child die. Just then, footsteps echoed from the alley's entrance. Zelani's body tensed. She pulled the child behind her, using her own body as a shield. Her heart pounded. Was it a guard? A cruel traitor? Someone who hated her kind? The footsteps stopped. A shadow stood at the edge of the alley, silent, watching. Zelani's eyes locked. On to the figure. She couldn't make out the face, but it was tall, human. He didn't move forward, but he didn't leave either. She whispered to her child not to move, not to make a sound. Then the man slowly stepped forward. Zelani pressed her back to the wall. Her arms shook. Her child hid behind her legs, eyes wide with fear. The man reached into his coat. Zelani gasped, expecting a weapon. But instead, he pulled out a food pack, a sealed, clean, warm ration box. Without a word, he placed it on the ground between them and stepped back. Zelani didn't move. She didn't trust it. Maybe it was poisoned. Maybe it was a trap. She had seen humans laugh while tossing fake coins at beggars. She had seen them spit at starving mothers. But then her child crawled forward, touched the box, and looked up at her with pleading eyes. Zelani's heart broke. She nodded slowly. The child opened the box, and the smell of real food filled the air. Warm bread, soft rice, a fruit bar. The child took a bite and cried, not because it tasted bad, but because it was too good, too real, after so long. Zelani blinked, her throat tight. The man still said nothing. He crouched, placed a small heater on the ground, and left a folded blanket nearby. Then he looked at her. Not with pity, not with hate, but something else. Understanding, he turned and walked away. Zelani didn't know his name. She didn't know why he helped her. But that night her child slept full and warm, for the first time in weeks. And she, who had promised never to cry again, silently wiped a tear as she wrapped her child in the new blanket. Maybe there was still kindness in the universe. Maybe hope wasn't dead. She didn't know it yet, but that simple act of kindness had already begun to change their lives, and he had promised himself he would return. She thought he was just passing by like all the others. She didn't even raise her head when his boots stopped near the edge of the alley. But when he crouched down slowly, placing something gently on the ground, she finally looked up. It was him again. The same human man from yesterday. Same old coat, same silent eyes. No badge, no weapon. Just calm and something else, something strange in this cruel world. Kindness. Zelani watched him carefully. Her child, still holding a half-eaten fruit bar from yesterday, leaned against her side, eyes wide but not afraid this time. The man reached into his coat once more, and this time pulled out a thermos. He twisted it open, letting the scent of hot broth fill the cold air. He placed it near the food pack and waited. Zelnine didn't move at first. Her body still remembered betrayal. She had once accepted help from a soldier, only to be dragged out of a food line and thrown into the mud for cutting in. But this man had come back, and he hadn't asked for anything in return. She reached forward slowly, picked up the thermos, and poured some into the cup. The steam warmed her hands before it even touched her lips, offered it to her child first, who sipped and sighed, like it was magic. The man smiled just a little, then sat on the edge of a broken crate, didn't speak, just looked around the alley, as if he'd been here before, as if he had once known what it felt like to be forgotten. Zell and I studied him. His coat was dusty, patched in places. His boots were scuffed old. This man wasn't rich, didn't look like someone who had much to give, yet here he was, feeding aliens no one else would touch. "Why?" she whispered, her voice dry and unsure. "Do you help?" The man didn't answer right away. He looked at the child, who had curled up again, under the blanket he left. Then he looked at Zelani, and finally said, "Because I've seen too many die without anyone even trying." His voice was quiet, deep and tired. He stood up, brushed dust from his knees, and said, "This place is not safe. Too many angry people around here. Come with me." Zelani froze. She had heard these words before. "Come with me," from men who smiled and then sold you, from people who offered warmth only to chain you after. But his voice wasn't sweet or fake. It was plain, real. Still, she hesitated. She looked at her child, sleeping now with a full belly. If they stayed, they'd be chased out again or worse. He waited patiently. When she still didn't move, he simply nodded and walked away. But this time, he didn't leave empty-handed. He left the alley with one silent promise. "I'll return again." Zelani didn't sleep that night. She sat awake, her eyes scanning the alley walls, wondering if she had made a mistake by letting him close. But deep down, in the quiet place where fear and hope wrestled, something had changed. Her child was alive, full, warm, and the human had come back. That meant something. When morning came, the sky was gray and wet. She kept her child dry under the crates, waiting to see if he would really return again. By midday, the alley was quiet. She almost gave up. Then she heard the soft crunch of boots in the wet dirt. It was him, but this time, carried something different, a small, folded piece of metal like a portable shelter frame. Set it down, popped it open, and revealed a simple but clean storage pod. "No one checks these near the old docks," he said, pointing. "It's not warm, but it's dry. You'll be safer there." Lonnie didn't move right away. But when her child reached for the human's hand, not with fear but trust, she finally stood up. She didn't know where he came from. She didn't know why he cared. But in a world where everyone stepped over her and her child, this man had stepped closer, and that meant the world. The rain had stopped, but the wind was sharp. Cold slid through the cracks of the city like a silent thief, stealing whatever warmth the night had left. Zelani sat inside the small metal shelter he had given her, a thin shell, barely big enough to sit in, but it was the only thing between her child and the freezing wind. She hadn't seen him since yesterday. Her child slept in her lap, wrapped in the human's old blanket. The tiny heater he left flickered once, then died. The charge was gone. Zelani wrapped her arms tighter around the child and looked out through the half-open flap. No footsteps came. She began to wonder if he had lied. If maybe he was like the others, kind once, then gone forever. She had seen kindness before, but it never lasted. People gave scraps only to feel good about themselves, then disappeared when things got hard. But her child still smiled. Her child still believed the human would return. She wished she could believe too. Just as the last light of day faded into gray clouds, she heard it boots on the gravel. Slow, steady, heavy with purpose. Zelani's breath caught. She turned her head quickly. There he was, the same man, the same dusty coat. But this time he carried more. A small bag over one shoulder, folded mat under his arm, and something steaming in his hand. He knelt by the shelter, gently lifting the flap, told. "You'd come back," he said. Zelani didn't speak, but the way her eyes filled with relief, the way her child sat up and reached for the heat in his hands that said everything. He handed them a warm container of broth, thick with grains and tiny pieces of meat. Then he laid out the mat inside the shelter and adjusted the walls so that wind couldn't get in. It wasn't much, but now it felt like something close to a home. "I'm Mark," he said suddenly, as he set down more supplies. Mark Halden. Zelani blinked. No one had told her their name in months. She had been called things: beggar, stranger, filth, but not with a name, not with kindness. "Zelani," she whispered, her voice softer than the wind. He smiled and nodded. "And your little one?" "Pico," she answered, resting a hand on her child's head. Mark looked at the child, then back at her. "I found an empty room near the outer zone. I rent it. It's not big, but it has heat, water, and locks." Zelani's face tightened. "I know what you're thinking," Mark said, reading her fear. "I'm not offering anything in return. I just don't want to see you freeze out here." Zelani didn't reply. She looked down at her child, who had already started sipping the broth with both hands. The smell was warm. The room he mentioned sounded safe, but so had other places. Once she had to decide quickly. If she stayed here, Pico would get sick. The cold was already crawling under his skin. Finally, she looked at Mark and nodded slowly. That night, they walked together through quiet streets. Zelani carried Pico in her arms, wrapped in the blanket. Mark led them through back lanes, away from the eyes of those who might question. He moved carefully, like someone used to hiding good things from bad people. When they reached the room, it was exactly as he had said. A single bed, a working heater, a faucet, and even a cracked mirror. It was dusty, but clean, safe. Zelani placed Pico on the bed. He fell asleep instantly. Breathing deep and warm for the first time in many nights, Mark handed her a dry towel, a clean shirt, and a bottle of water. He didn't look at her body. He didn't ask personal questions. He just checked the heater, left a second blanket, and stepped back toward the door. "I'll be back in the morning," he said, pausing before he left. "If you want me to bring anything, just write it on this." He placed a small notepad and a pen on the table, then turned to go. But before he opened the door, Zelani called out, "Why? Why are you helping us?" He stopped. After a moment, he said, "Because someone once helped me, when I had nothing. I couldn't save her, but maybe I can save you." Then, without another word, he walked out and closed the door gently. Behind him, inside, Zelani stood in the middle of the room, her hands shaking not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It started with a stare. One morning, as Mark walked through the market with a food bag in hand, he noticed a trader watching him from behind his stall. The man said nothing, but his eyes followed every step. Another day, a group of dock workers paused their lunch as Mark passed by. They nudged each other and whispered. Mark kept walking. He had gotten used to silence, but this silence was different. It was thick, heavy, the kind of silence that comes before trouble. Inside the room, Zelani was helping Pico wash his hands. She had cleaned the floor, folded the blankets, and even prepared a simple dish from the ingredients Mark brought. Movements were careful, precise, almost graceful, like someone who once had pride but now lived quietly in survival. But Mark noticed something else. Her back was straighter now. Her eyes held more focus. Her voice, though still soft, didn't tremble when she spoke. She was healing. Still outside, things were changing. At the market gates, 2 guards stood longer than usual. One even approached Mark and asked where he had been. Mark smiled, gave a short answer, and walked on. But he felt it. The shift. The eyes. The low voices. One afternoon, as he loaded fresh bread into his bag, a woman behind the stall narrowed her eyes and said, "You help one of them, don't you?" Mark didn't flinch. "She's not a threat," the woman scoffed. "Doesn't matter. Your kind always feels sorry." "Then their kind takes everything." Mark didn't reply. Paid, took the bread, and walked away. He told Zelani none of it. But she knew. One evening, as she served warm soup to Pico, she asked gently, "Are they angry?" Mark looked up from his seat. "Some people always get angry when someone does something good." Zelani said nothing, but her hands paused for a moment. The next day, a scratch was found on the door. Just one, shallow but fresh, as if someone had dragged metal across it. Mark noticed it right away. Zelani stood behind him, silent. He turned to her. "We may need to move." But she shook her head. "No, not again. He's safe here." "I'm safe here." Mark hesitated. He had promised to protect them, but now the danger wasn't hunger or cold. It was the people later that week. He returned to the market and heard his name behind his back. A man muttered something about alien lover. Another spat near his boots. He kept walking. That night, Mark brought something new, a small communicator. "If anything happens," he said, "just press this. I'll come fast." Zelani stared. At the device, then at him. "You're putting yourself in danger." Mark shrugged. "It's not the first time." Zelani sat beside him after Pico fell asleep. She didn't speak for a while. Then she said, "I thought all humans hated us. I thought maybe we deserved it." Mark looked at her. "No one deserves to be thrown away." She nodded slowly. But not many believed that. Outside, wind howled against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a siren cried. The city was restless, and in the shadows of the market, angry voices grew louder. The next morning, someone threw a broken plate near the doorway. Just shards. A warning. Mark picked them up, careful not to let Pico see. Zelani touched his arm. "Maybe we should go." Mark looked at her, then at the sleeping child. "No," he said firmly. "If we run now, we'll keep running forever." For the first time, Zelani didn't argue. That night, as she stood by the window, watching the empty street below, she whispered to herself, "Let them whisper. Let them watch. As long as my child sleeps safe, I will not be afraid." Didn't know someone else had already followed Mark that evening, and they weren't whispering anymore. The lights were off, but the room was not dark. The small heater glowed in the corner, casting a warm orange light across the floor. Rain tapped gently against the window. Kosaya slept peacefully on the bed, hugging the blanket close. Outside, the city murmured with distant sirens and soft thunder. Mark sat on the floor near the wall, his back resting against cold stone. Zelani sat across from him, cross-legged, a bowl of hot tea in her hands. Neither had spoken for a while, but the silence wasn't awkward. It felt real. Then, without looking up, she spoke. "You want to know where I came from?" Mark looked at her, surprised, but said nothing. "My world was green," she continued, her voice soft but steady. "Rivers were blue. Trees danced with the wind. My husband was a teacher. I was a historian. We read stories to children. We grew fruits in our garden." She paused, eyes staring into the past. Then ships came. Not ours, yours, not yours alone, others too. We didn't know what war looked like until buildings fell and fire rained from the sky. My husband died protecting a library. Mark swallowed hard. I held Pico in my arms, hiding in a supply crate while the city burned. We escaped, barely. We begged for help, but to the galaxy, we were enemies. Even those who never touched a weapon. I landed here because it was the last stop before the refugee centers shut down, but no one wanted us. I slept in corners. I cleaned trash, begged for food. Then one day the food stopped coming. She looked at him now, her eyes shining in the heater's glow. I thought no one would ever help me again, until you, Mark. Exhaled. I didn't know that much. I just saw you there. I couldn't walk away. Zelani tilted her head. Why? Mark shifted his position, leaning forward. Years ago, during a virus outbreak, I was trapped in a collapsing city. People were dying fast. I tried to get my sister out. She was just 12. Zelani listened quietly. I begged for help, shouted, carried her on my back, but no one stopped. No one opened their door. She died in my arms, just before the rescue team arrived. He looked at his hands, trembling slightly. I swore then. If I ever saw someone in need, I wouldn't be the person who looked away. Zelani's voice lowered. So, I remind you of her. No, Mark said quickly. You're not like her. You're stronger. You survive longer. You carried someone too. Their eyes met. I don't help you because I feel sorry, he added. I help you because you didn't give up. And I see that. Zelani blinked. She had heard lies, fake, compliments, even cruel sympathy, but never truth. She looked down. Do you regret it? Helping us? Mark didn't even hesitate. Not for a second. She nodded slowly, setting her tea down beside her. Even if the others turn on you. Even if it costs you everything. He smiled, not a happy smile, but a quiet one. Then it means something worth losing. The heater flickered for a moment, casting shadows across the walls. Zelani stood up, walked to the window, and looked out. Rain had stopped, but puddles sparkled in the streetlights. She spoke without turning around. You've done enough, more than anyone. What? There is something I need to say. Mark stood too, unsure what she meant. She turned to him. If you ever feel afraid, if you ever feel like you've made a mistake, we will go. I won't let your kindness destroy your life. Mark stepped closer. And if I say, this life means nothing to me without people to care for, what then? She didn't reply. But the silence between them now was different. It wasn't full of fear. It was full of something else. Trust. That night, Mark stayed a little longer. He told stories about Earth, about forests, machines, flying sports. Zelani laughed once softly. Pico even woke up briefly and smiled at the sound of her voice. When Mark finally left, the city was quiet again, and Zelani stood at the window, watching him disappear into the dark, knowing one thing for certain. He wasn't saving her anymore. She was saving him too. The knock wasn't gentle. It came like thunder, 3 hard pounds on the door, shaking the walls. Zelani froze where she stood, her hands still holding a bowl of warm water. Pico looked up from the floor, eyes wide with fear. Before she could move, the door slammed open. 2 guards stepped into Lal, armored faces hidden behind black visors. Behind them stood a woman in a sharp gray uniform, holding a datapad and wearing a cold smile. You're harboring an unauthorized alien, she said without emotion. Mark stepped between them and Zelani without a second thought. She's not a criminal, he said firmly. She's a widow with a child. The officer raised an eyebrow, and that changes the law. She's done nothing wrong, he replied. She entered this zone without registry, without papers, without permission. That is the wrong, she snapped. And you, Mark Halden, are accused of aiding her. You have 72 hours too. Remove her from this property, or you will be arrested and charged under Section 7A. Zelani's breath caught in her throat. Ko clung to her side. Mark didn't blink. And if I refuse? The officer smirked. Then you'll be treated the same as her. The guards turned and walked out, boots echoing like a warning. The door remained open on purpose. Mark closed it gently. The silence in the room was heavy. Zelani spoke first. We'll leave. No, Mark said. You don't understand, she whispered. If they arrest you, if they put a mark on your name, you'll lose your job, your home, everything. I won't lose myself, he answered, and I won't lose you. Zelani stood still, then slowly turned away. She picked up her bag and started folding the child's blanket. What are you doing? He asked. I won't let you burn because of me, she said. You saved us. Now let us go. Mark walked over and gently pulled the blanket from her hands. You are not a burden. You are not the problem. They are. She looked at him, tears building behind her strong gaze. Don't owe us anything. I know, he said, and that's why I choose to fight. That night, Mark sat alone with a pen and a plan. He wrote a letter to the local council. He collected evidence video footage from the alley, images of Pico's condition when he found them, old messages, of shelter rejections. And the next morning, he stood at the council building, tired, unshaved but unafraid. Inside, 10 council members stared at him as if he were a noise in a quiet room. "You are defending an undocumented alien," one said. Mark nodded. "I am defending a mother, a life, a child." "They are not citizens," another said. "They are not criminals either," he replied. "They are survivors, victims of war. When your laws don't protect the innocent, they punish the forgotten." Room shifted. Some were angry, few were quiet. He placed the photo of Pico on the desk. "If your child had nothing to eat, no bed, no safety, would you punish the one who gave him shelter?" One councilwoman picked up the image. Her fingers trembled. "You want to make her a citizen?" a man asked. "I want her to live without fear," Mark said. "I want the law to protect those who still believe in kindness." Outside, Zelani sat in a hallway, holding Pico close. Her heart beat like a drum. Every minute felt like a knife turning, then dashed footsteps. She looked up and saw Mark walking toward her. His face was tired. His coat was soaked from the rain. But his eyes were burning with something powerful. "Come with me," he said. They walked into the hall again, side by side. The head councilman stood before them, a data chip in hand. "This isn't permanent," he said, "but it's a beginning. Temporary clearance, shelter rights, and no further action." Zelani's knees weakened. Mark caught her before she fell. Pico looked around, not understanding fully, but he smiled because his mother did. The nightmare wasn't over, but they were still standing, and now they had a voice. The sun was rising, but not just outside, inside the small room. The light from the window touched the edge of the blanket where Pico slept peacefully, wrapped in warmth. For the first time in weeks, there were no guards at the door, no fear in the air, and no hunger in his belly. Zelani stood near the sink, folding a fresh cloth. She watched the steam rise from a pot of clean water, but her eyes were far away, lost in thoughts she had once buried deep. Behind her, Mark stepped in, holding a bag of fruit and fresh bread. "The baker gave us extra today," he said, setting it on the table. Zelani turned and smiled, a real smile, not the polite one she used to hide pain, but one full of breath and light. "People stared less today," he added, still whispered, "but not like before." "They're watching a different man now," she said softly. He tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "You're not just the man who gave food to an alien," she replied. "You're the one who stood in front of power and didn't kneel." Mark looked at her for a long moment. You're not just someone I helped. You're someone I came to admire." Zelani blushed slightly and looked away. Later that day, they visited the shelter office. The council's ruling had granted her temporary status, but they needed to make it official. A signature. A document. A name. The worker behind the desk asked her gently, "Do you want to keep your original identity?" Zelani looked at Pico, then at Mark, who stood behind her, steady and proud. She shook her head. "I want to register with a new name," she said. "What name?" the worker asked. She turned to Mark. "You gave me a new life. It feels right to share the name of the one who saved it." Mark's eyes widened. "Zelani," she smiled, "if you allow it." The worker tapped the keys. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. "And your son, Pico Halden?" she whispered. Mark said nothing, but his hand gently found hers under the table. He didn't let go. They moved into a new place soon after, small two-room unit on the city's quiet side. Not fancy. Not big, but clean and warm. Zelani decorated the walls with sketches, while Pico drew stars and ships with colored chalk. Mark built shelves. He taught Pico how to use a screwdriver and laughed when the boy dropped everything. In the evenings, they ate together, read stories, and shared memories, not of war or loss, but of hope, courage, and healing. One night, as the sky turned purple outside, Pico ran into the room holding a small piece of cloth. "I made this," he said proudly. It was a square, stitched with clumsy hands. But the design was clear, a figure in a long coat, holding the hand of a smaller one with a third beside them. Zelani took the cloth, tears rising in her eyes. Mark crouched down. "Who are they?" Pico said. "And Mama, and me." Zelani looked at Mark. He sees you as his father now. Mark placed a hand on Pico's head, then looked at her, and I see him as my son. She reached out, holding Mark's other hand with a soft grip. Before you, she said, we had no name, no home, no reason to wake up tomorrow. Mark shook his head gently, and now, she said, her voice steady, we have all three. As night fell, and the lights inside the house glowed warm and golden, the three of them sat together, no longer strangers, no longer broken. Outside, the city still whispered, but inside, there was only peace. And in that peace, the story of the poor alien widow and her child came to an end, not with silence, not with sorrow, but with a new beginning, written by the hands of a human who chose to care when no one else would.